Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I ended up in this situation.
Hello everyone, welcome to a new video that's a little different from what I normally do. Typically I prefer to make videos on the perks in Dead by Daylight, as when it comes to the killers, my information on how to play as them is not as great as my knowledge on the perks for the game. There are a lot of videos out there, from people who are better than me not only at the game, but better at the killers that they play. But I still want to throw my voice out there to teach the fundamental basics on the killers DBD has to offer. I was thinking for a very long time who I wanted to start the series on first, and I decided to talk about one of my most favorite killers in the game, that being Dredge, otherwise known by the community as the Goofy Turkey. I have always loved Dredge ever since I first saw him. But sadly, the community and his balance had not shown the same amount of passion as I do for him now. He's a killer who may consider to be very strong, but he has fallen off the planet, all the way down to being average in strength. It's a little weird, as he hasn't really received many changes since his launch. It's instead players learning to counter him, along with behavior not remembering how his kit works when designing maps half the time. Also, I did not forget they got buffed. I made a video talking about that, which is the big reason why this video got delayed. But for a general answer, I don't think the buffs will do much overall. To start, let's look at the basic elements when it comes to Dredge. He is a killer with a 32 meter terror radius, along with being a 115 move speed killer. His power, Reign of Darkness, can be split into two parts, that being his mobility and his passive in-game event. His mobility, otherwise known as the gloaming, which is just a fancy way of saying dusk or twilight, slows down your move speed, but grants the ability to teleport to any locker on the map. Once Dredge enters a locker, he can either exit it or he can teleport again, but there is a limit on how many times you can teleport. Dredge has 3 tokens, and when teleporting, one of them will be consumed. Once you are out of tokens, you need to exit the locker, and you will be placed on a cooldown of 10 seconds with this recent buff. The cooldown is fixed, so you can teleport once, or twice, or thrice, and it will always stay the same. There's no range limit on the teleport either, so you can go here, you can go there, you can go anywhere, as long as there's a locker. However, if you have played against Dredge, you may already realize there are quite a few glaring flaws with this power. Dredge was one of the many killers in the game that didn't know the word subtlety, as he liked to telegraph to survivor players whenever he entered the locker with a loud bang. He also plays sinister music if you stay in the locker long enough, but you rarely want to hide in a locker for extended periods of time. The lockers also spawn with a yellow lock that survivors can interact with. And these things are the second greatest cause of graying hairs for Dredge mains. And don't worry, we'll go over the other cause of graying hairs in a moment. The locks are exactly what they say on the tin. They are locks. Survivors interact with it and the locker will be closed. No one can enter them, except Dredge. But if he wants to get out because he has a severe case of claustrophobia, he will need to go through a lengthy lock break animation. The lock break animation is now 2.25 seconds, but it used to be a full 3 seconds of agony. But once broken, survivors cannot lock that locker again, meaning that Dredge can leave at a much faster pace. The locks also take priority when teleporting for Dredge, so if he teleports to a locker cluster, like this one, he will be forced to enter the locked one first. This makes locking one locker in a cluster at a time a nice way for survivors to annoy Dredge players. And survivors locking multiple lockers in a cluster is a surefire way to cause their teammates to want to DC. Now onto the greatest cause of graying hairs for Dredge mains, and that is the lockers and their placement. There's an ongoing battle between Dredge mains and Behavior's map design team, as Behavior like to forget that lockers need to exist in the game for certain killers and perks to function. So, in many cases, you will find maps where there is a massive cluster of lockers everywhere you look, and then you enter Coldwind and realize there are 2 lockers that exist. And they're in the basement in Killer Shack. You see, this is the big reason why Dredge has fallen so low in strength over the years, as he is a killer who is very dependent on Behavior's placement of lockers. There have been many cases where I have teleported as Dredge, and I hear a generator while passing by at 90%. I would like to stop that generator from popping, but Behavior said Instead of placing the locker near the generator, we will instead give you one that exists 50 feet away. Also, many of you may be pointing out the buffs, and yes, they are great additions for Dredge, but they only help Dredge in making him better at what he already does well, and they don't target the big problem, and that is his map dependency. It is because of this that the design team around Dredge realized they needed something to help him out, as the locker placement was never going to be fixed in the modern age. So, through the power of lazy thinking, and stress of making another bad killer, we get what I like to call baby's first anti-loop. Whenever Dredge enters the gloaming, he plops out a creepy little thing that looks like a smaller version of him. If you decide not to teleport to a locker, you can instead teleport back to the baby turkey, and you will be facing the direction you were looking when you started the gloaming. The big reason why I call it baby's first anti-loop is because you want to dance with the survivor at a loop while holding the gloaming up, and if they get close enough, you can teleport and swing out to hit them, similar to Hag when you trip her phantasm traps. It can be destroyed if a survivor runs into it, but you will most likely teleport just as soon as they get too close to your precious child. If they do destroy it, you can just exit out of the gloaming and go back in, as Behavior forgot to give this part of his power a cooldown as well. If they decide to run away from the thing, you can just let go of the gloaming and give the survivor a good ol' smack on the noggin. It's a really cheap form of anti-loop that exists in the game, and it isn't the most enjoyable to face. But when you are playing a killer whose main gameplay is controlled by map design, you take what you can get. I have been sounding rather pessimistic about Dredge's kit so far, but one thing I need to make clear is that I am not pessimistic. I am realistic. Dredge is a killer who is punished by map design, and if you are new to the game, Dredge is not the greatest starting killer, as he rewards player knowledge and patience, which is something you will need in many of the maps in this game. That being said, if you do decide to learn Dredge, then you will find there is one part of his kit that makes all the problems I mentioned about him a lot more tolerable. And that is Nightfall. This is a passive effect that Dredge has in his kit, similar to Pinhead's Chain Hunt. But unlike Chain Hunt, you can reduce the timer by performing many actions. These actions include injuring or hooking a survivor, teleporting away to the creepy void child, teleporting or entering lockers, which continues while inside of a locker, and of course, keeping survivors injured, as the more are injured, the faster the timer. The timer is only visible on your screen, making survivors unaware of when it will start. However, there is a sound cue when Nightfall is 85% close to activating, and once activated, the whole screen will change. The survivors will be visible in a bright white highlight, and Dredge will be highlighted white as well on the survivor's screen, but it will be more dim. The biggest difference is that although your screen is turned monochrome, the survivor's screen are given a black filter. They will only be able to see around 8 to 12 meters in front of them, so there are many times when survivors will run into a wall and not even realize it. During Nightfall, Dredge likes to search through his hidden stash of Legion's Cold Dirt add-ons that he stole for recreational purposes, as Nightfall boosts all of his kit. The teleport speed is now doubled. He reveals survivors with Killer Instinct when they are 16 meters near a locker or the strange diamond he plops out. And greatest of all, his cooldowns are reduced all the way to 4 seconds. He also has Undetectable during Nightfall, but even then it's a little hard to tell, since everyone will forever hear the moans and groans of comp survivor wannabes who were mad they didn't face a tunneling blight or nurse. Nightfall will last for 60 seconds, and then everything goes back to normal, and Dredge mains go back to being depressed again. Now that we understand the basics on how Dredge works, how do you play the Cursed Turkey? Well, Dredge, like many killers in the game, is an M1 focused killer, but his power allows him to cheat in ways that other M1 killers cannot. This more so has to do with the remnant that he places, as this thing allows him to ignore any tile in the game. Even something as strong as Killer Shack will fall over with a well-placed remnant. I won't be discussing the anti-loop element of Dredge as much as I should, but mostly because it isn't the biggest reason why Dredge mains love him. That is, unless you are a gaming athlete, and your addiction to the remnant leads to a full guide on the placement of the tiny creature that hides in all Dredge mains' minds. That being said, there are some important things I want to note about the remnant, and the first thing is to hide it from the survivor's sightlines. This ends up helping you, as the survivor knows that you are planning to use the remnant, but they don't know the exact location, making it a lot more tougher in knowing what locations they should avoid. Obviously, this will depend on the tiles you loop on and their heights, but it's an important thing to note regardless. There is also an audio effect on the Remnant, so smart players will keep an ear out, but with how much is going on, they are going to have a tough time. Plus, the buffs to the move speed while holding out the Remnant makes utilizing the anti-loop much easier. The second thing I will mention is to give enough space for your Remnant from a pallet. The reason I mention this is because players are able to destroy the Remnant just by walking into it, and if you place a Remnant near a pallet and the survivor knows you will teleport, they will pre-drop it on your head. It's because of this that it is better to place it near the edge of a certain loop, while chasing the player the other way around the tile. The Remnant will be just close enough that you can lunge out of it, while far enough away from a survivor being able to destroy it. And since you force them into a pallet, they now need to choose to vault or not. It's similar to Hag standoffs, where the trap is on one side of the loop while you are on the other. Regardless, it is a lose-lose situation for them, as they will get hit if you played everything right. The thing I do want to talk a little bit more is Dredge's teleport, as unlike other killers, you can cut off survivors from reaching certain tiles, and at times, can enter them to get the drop on players. There used to be a certain add-on that made this playstyle far easier, but after the buffs, it is not needed as much now. Cutting off players with Dredge's teleport in theory sounds simple enough, but you need to know the strength of certain tiles, along if there is a locker close enough to catch the survivor off guard. Then you have to also hope and pray that it hasn't been locked yet, but then you remember this is Dead by Daylight, so of course it will be locked. In the rare cases where it isn't, however, it's a very beautiful thing to witness. Okay, now on to add-ons. And weirdly enough, Dredge has some of the finest assortment of add-ons that Deathslinger, Nemesis, and Pyramid Head mains are envious for. That being said, if you have ever faced a Dredge, then you most likely have seen Malthinker's Skull, and that is because it was one of the finest add-ons that any killer could have ever wanted. It used to increase the charge rate of Nightfall by 66% as long as a survivor is injured, and if any of you have watched Otsdarva's video on the power of Malthinker's Skull, then you realize how potent it really was for a yellow add-on. The add-on just allows you to snowball much easier into a Nightfall play, and because of that, it ended up being a must-pick for most Dredge mains. It has seen a readjustment with the Dredge changes, but it has been made partially base kit, so it's not a necessity anymore, but is still a good option. If you find the Skull too trendy, you can also get away with these other add-ons, as there are plenty that reward other playstyles too. One add-on that has grown in favor in recent times is Darbys Calendar, so much so that behavior made it partially base. This add-on was what I refer to as an addictive trap, as once you start running it, you begin to feel agony once you play Dredge without it. Its reason for its popularity was a no-brainer, as it allows you to catch survivors faster from a locked locker, it starts your cooldown sooner, and of course it just feels smoother. It still is a great option even after its adjustments. The other two add-ons that you may have noticed Dredge mains utilizing are the Boat Key and Automarian Writing, which were also made partially base. I wonder why. These things were extremely powerful, as the Boat Key gave you a 25% boost to your teleport speed outside of Nightfall, along with breaking all locks at the endgame. This ended up being a consistency booster for Dredge when not in Nightfall, which is something that he needed to catch up in more sweaty games, along with helping him out when the last gen pops. It also allowed you to cut off survivors running to tiles a lot easier than with the base teleport speed, so it rewarded those kinds of plays. The other add-on reduces the cooldown of his teleport by 4 seconds outside of Nightfall, and this also applies to his game start cooldown. Even after the adjustments, these two add-ons are extremely dangerous, and they allow for a very goofy playstyle that I enjoy, called the fishing build. Outside of these add-ons, Dredge also has a few other options, but their values tend to vary on the player. The Field Recorder has the ability to enhance Dredge's ability to snowball even more, as you start the trial in Nightfall, along with starting Nightfall when the last generator is powered. I know this tends to be a fan favorite for most, but I personally enjoy Darbys Calendar and Malthinkers too much to ever consider it. That being said, it can be useful for endgame builds, but at the start of the trial, you will still be set on the 10-second cooldown, so Automarian Writing helps reduce that pain. The Lavalier microphone is weird. It grants an aura reveal on all survivors after using all of these tokens, along with slamming lockers near survivors. It's a useful tool for intel gathering, as if someone is running distortion, you will still know they are nearby because of the locker slam. It's an add-on that I recommend for players who like trying unconventional things, but not one that is new player friendly. Lastly, we got Broken Doll, which increases Nightfall by 20 seconds. Yeah, I don't need to explain why it's good. The rest of the add-ons are tolerable, and can fetch some value. But I want to note that if you wish to main Dredge, you should never use the Mortar and Pestle. It changes how the camera angle works when you teleport to the Remnant, where instead of looking where you were when starting the gloaming, it instead looks where you were looking when activating the teleport. It's meant to reduce confusion, as players will be disoriented when playing Dredge at first, but I recommend not running it. It can end up spoiling the learning experience for Dredge, and it can even lead to even more confusion at times. On to build paths, and this is where things get tricky. Dredge is a killer who in theory has the ability to have a variety of build paths, but in practice it ends up being rather static. This has to do with the fact that you want to continue to snowball as much as possible with him, and since you are much slower when Nightfall isn't active, you want to run perks that help keep you in the game. It's because of this that Dredge players tend to run very sweaty builds, not because they want to sweat, but because his kit supports the need for it. That being said, there are a few build options that Dredge players and myself have enjoyed, and a very funny one is the Fisher build. I recommended it earlier when discussing both Key and Automator writing, but combined with Lethal Pursuer and other aura reading perks like Darkness Revealed, you can locate survivors going towards lockers and teleport to them when they are interacting with it. I didn't mention this in the base element with Dredge's kit, mostly because it doesn't happen very often, but Dredge can instantly grab survivors who are hiding in lockers, or who are interacting with them with his teleport. This build leads into this part of his kit. Using the lockers as bait, you can stalk your target, and when they are interacting with the locker, you can then fish them out, fetching you a very quick down. It doesn't work all the time, but when it does, it is very satisfying. Another build that Dredge can handle quite nicely is Shaman builds, more specifically Totem builds. Dredge is one of the few killers who can hold Totem defense unlike any other, and because of this he can turn perks like Devour Hope into an absolute nightmare to tackle with on the survivor side. This kind of build is very awkward to run consistently however, as you are relying on RNG of Totem spawns along with the RNG of Locker spawns. But hey, when it works, it is incredibly fun. Then, of course, we have the endgame build for Dredge, and I won't say much, since it's what you expect, it's a build for the endgame. On to specific perks, Dredge has a few that he personally really enjoys to run, with one in particular being called out when he initially came out. Make Your Choice is a very deadly perk for Dredge, as his mobility allows him to catch up to the marked target, and due to his remnant, he can easily deny the player from escaping the one-shot. Along with Make Your Choice, Friends Till the End is another great perk to accelerate your snowball potential even more, as you gain information on the next target, along with applying Expose to them. The big problem with Friends Till the End, however, is the fact that its aura reveal can be denied by distortion, which ends up making Make Your Choice a much nicer option. Floods of Rage is also a lovely perk that I have had way too much fun experimenting with on Dredge, and in general, Dredge loves having aura reveal to locate his next target. It helps him out in knowing when to use his anti-loop, and it helps to show where to apply pressure next. Speaking about pressure, Sloppy Butcher used to be a mainstay in Dredge main's builds, as this thing had a permanent duration to mangled and hemorrhaging. It has been nerfed to only last for 90 seconds, but it is still an important part in many players' builds, not only because it combos nicely with Dredge, being an M1 killer, but also helps keep people injured, and helps to keep Nightfall building up faster. Lastly, we need to talk about maps, as Dredge is one of the many killers in the game who is very dependent on the map that he plays on. As expected, Dredge will perform exceptionally well when he is on indoor maps, as these locations are swarmed with locker clusters that live near generators. It can be a double-edged sword however, as the teleport could auto-aim to a different locker, but after a while of playing him, you will get used to being more careful. Of all of the indoor maps, Midwich is probably his strongest, not only because of its weaker tiles that allows his remnant to apply more pressure, but because all the lockers sit quite comfortably near the generators. There is a reason why DBD League has Dredge games on Midwich, and that is why. As for weaker maps, Dredge will begin to struggle on maps where locker placement is more sparse. Good examples of these maps include Eyrie of Crows, Backwater Swamp, and of course, Coldwind. which causes Dredge maze to froth at the mouth when players use their associated map offerings. These three are the greatest examples of behavior's map logic being thrown out the window, as the blocker placement tends to be hyper-fixated on the main building, shack, and certain tiles, but the generators are all spread 50 yards away from the closest locker. Luckily, these three are the only real troublemakers for Dredge, as the other outdoor maps are a lot more tame in comparison to their wacky locker logic. This next bit is going to be sped through a little, as I only want to go over the fundamental basics about Dredge's kit and how he plays, but I still want to mention a few tricks to remember when playing Dredge to make your life just a little easier. Firstly, whenever you get the chance and you don't want to teleport anywhere, you should teleport to the Remnant. This can be seen in many competitive DBD games with Dredge players, and that is because it helps to apply charges to the Nightfall. It's not a massive boost, but it can help fetch Nightfall just a little faster. Secondly, if you realize Nightfall is about to activate and you are still teleporting, you should exit the locker. Nightfall has a cheeky element to it, where even after exiting a locker once it activates, it still doesn't apply the cooldown reduction at times, instead applies the base cooldown. It is because of this that I prefer not to use the teleport when I am around 90% close to triggering Nightfall, as I don't want to waste time waiting for my cooldowns to fully reset. Thirdly, you cannot teleport to lockers close to hook targets. This is a design decision from behavior to prevent tunneling, but they do become available after 1 second of someone being unhooked. Lastly, during Nightfall, you should consider teleporting where you are standing if you suspect a player is hiding. As I said, Nightfall grants Dredge Killer Instinct on his teleport near the locker he teleported to or near the Remnant. This means that you can use it as a scouting tool if you suspect players are attempting to hide out the Nightfall, along with catching them by surprise, as many players are still unaware of this fact. Overall, Dredge is an interesting killer. His strength is dependent on the locker placements of the map he is spawned on, which means in more open maps he will struggle a lot more. But when he gets maps that are cluttered with lockers, it can lead to him controlling the game in a very unique way. Dredge may not be the greatest killer for new players, but he is a very enjoyable killer for players who have a general understanding of game sense. If you are willing to stick with him through his more clunky elements, he is a killer who can easily become a menace to face, and has the chance to snap the game in ways other mid-tier killers can't in comparison. Plus, he has some of the finest drip that any other killer would kill to own. Quite literally. This is all I gotta say about the Goofy Turkey, and if you are interested in learning more about him, I recommend watching Oddstarva and Gaming Athlete, as these two have created a variety of videos on Dredge, along with providing advanced tips on how to utilize them. With all that said and done, I wish you all the best of luck in your games, as you will need it if you see that stupid eyeball in the loading screen.